It was a sweltering summer in Chicago, and as the sun shone on the skyscrapers, the shadows of deceit deepened in Thomas's life. He had planned that trip with care, wanting the days with his wife, Sarah, and his friends to be memorable. However, the laughter and moments of relaxation soon gave way to whispers and furtive glances that he couldn't ignore. One night, upon returning to his hotel room earlier than expected, Thomas found the bed empty and Sarah's cell phone lit up with revealing messages. The name of one of the friends appeared repeatedly, and the words exchanged were enough to destroy any trace of trust. The pain of betrayal went through him like a blade, but he didn't let it show. Instead, a cold determination took hold of his being. Thomas decided that his revenge would be meticulous. He observed, noted, planned every move. It would not be an outburst of anger, but calculated retribution. He would discover that behind the betrayal there was more than just a summer fling. Sarah had arranged everything to escape the marriage, underestimating the cunning of the man she had committed to. Thomas was about to turn the tide, and summer in Chicago would never be the same. Thomas had always been a meticulous man. In his career as an architect in Chicago, every line drawn, every structure planned, reflected his attention to detail and his quest for perfection. At the age of 35, he had achieved a respectable position at the firm where he worked, and his life seemed to be well on its way. Married for 6 years to Sarah, a beautiful 32-year-old woman, they were seen as the perfect couple, always together at social events, elegant dinners and memorable trips. Sarah was a talented journalist, known for her ability to extract fascinating stories from ordinary people. Her green eyes and wavy brown hair were her trademark, but it was her charm and intelligence that really made her stand out. She had built a successful career at one of the city's main magazines, and her schedule was always full of interviews and appointments. Despite this, she always found time for friends, hosting get-togethers at her upscale apartment in downtown Chicago. The apartment they shared was a reflection of their personalities. On the 30th floor of a modern building, it offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan. The decor was a balance between Thomas's classic taste and Sarah's contemporary touch. Books on architecture and design were mixed with magazine editions and photos from his travels around the world. It was a welcoming home, but also a perfect setting for the social gatherings Sarah loved to organize. Among the couple's friends were Mark and Lisa, a couple they had known since college, and Jason, a charming and fun-loving bachelor who had always been the center of attention at parties. Mark was a successful lawyer, while Lisa worked as a chef at a famous restaurant in the city. Jason, meanwhile, was a publicist with a sharp sense of humor and an innate ability to make people feel at ease. Thomas had always felt a little out of place among this extroverted group. He was more reserved, preferring deep conversations and quiet moments. However, out of love for Sarah, he attended parties and meetings, trying to find his place in the group's lively dynamic. And it was at one of these meetings that the idea for the summer trip came up. Sarah had always been the enthusiastic organizer. She suggested they spend a week together at a beach house in Lake Geneva, a popular destination a few hours from Chicago. Everyone agreed, excited at the prospect of sunny days by the lake, starry nights and lots of laughter. Thomas, despite his fears, let himself be carried away by the group's enthusiasm, hoping that the trip would further strengthen his relationship with Sarah. Arriving at our destination, the beach house was even more impressive than in the photos. A modern construction, with large glass windows that allowed natural light to enter, and a stunning view of the lake. The house was spacious, with comfortable rooms and a living area that invited long conversations and group meals. On the first day, everything seemed perfect. Boat trips, lake swims, sunset barbecues and nights around the campfire. Thomas allowed himself to relax, believing that this week would be unforgettable, but for the best reasons. However, as the days passed, Thomas began to notice small changes in Sarah's behavior. She was more distant, always busy with her cell phone, laughing at messages she didn't share with him. The whispered conversations between her and Jason, the impromptu outings to buy something in town, and the complicit looks between the two did not go unnoticed. Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach, but decided not to jump to conclusions. He trusted Sarah, or at least wanted to. One night, while everyone was gathered around the fire, Sarah announced that she was going to bed early. Thomas, feeling tired from the day's activities, decided to follow her. However, when he entered the room, he only found the bed empty and her cell phone on the bedside table. Something inside him made him reach for the device. It wasn't something he usually did, but distrust had planted a seed in his mind. When he unlocked his cell phone, he found messages exchanged between Sarah and Jason. Affectionate words, secret plans, and confessions he had never imagined hearing from the woman he loved. Each line read was like a stab, and the pain of betrayal turned into calculated coldness. He did not confront Sarah at that time. Instead, he put his cell phone back and went for a walk by the lake, trying to organize his thoughts. Thomas spent the night awake, planning his next steps. He knew that he needed to act carefully, and every detail must be meticulously calculated. The next morning, Sarah acted as if nothing had happened, a smile on her lips and a lightness in her steps. Thomas also pretended, immersing himself in the role of loving husband and devoted companion. But inside him, the seed of revenge grew, fueled by pain and betrayal. He began to observe more closely, recording every movement, every word spoken and unspoken. Every day, his suspicions were confirmed, but he didn't let on. Instead, he used his architectural skills to plan the perfect revenge, a cold retribution that would leave Sarah devastated. She didn't know it, but she had awakened a side of Thomas that he himself didn't know about. As the sunny days turned into starry nights, Thomas prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He knew that this summer trip, planned to be a time of unity and happiness, would be remembered by everyone as the beginning of a dangerous game of lies and revenge. And when the moment came, he would be ready to turn the tables and show Sarah that no one underestimated Thomas without facing the consequences. Thomas spent the remaining days of the summer trip watching Sarah and Jason's every move. He maintained a facade of normalcy, laughing at Jason's jokes and participating in group activities, but inside, he was seething. The pain of betrayal was unbearable, but he channeled that pain into cold determination. He knew he couldn't act impulsively, I needed a plan. Back in Chicago, the daily routine masked the growing tension. Thomas returned to work, immersing himself in the architectural projects that had always been his passion. But in every coffee break, in every quiet moment, he planned. He knew that the first step in his revenge was to fully understand what Sarah had done and why. He began to investigate discreetly, collecting information without arousing suspicion. He hired a private detective to follow Sarah and Jason, and the discoveries were devastating. Not only had Sarah faked the cheating, but she was also planning to file for divorce and run away with Jason. They had even discussed financial details, planning how to divide Thomas's assets. Sarah's coldness and calculator were scary, but Thomas used it to his advantage. He began preparing his revenge with the same meticulousness he applied to his architectural projects. At home, Thomas maintained the appearance of a devoted husband. He cooked dinners, watched movies with Sarah, and pretended not to notice her long absences. At the same time, he started moving his pieces around the board. He talked to his lawyer, reviewed contracts and protected his assets. He knew that to win, he needed to be smarter and always be one step ahead. One Friday night, Sarah announced that she was going to dinner with some friends. Thomas, knowing the truth, wished her a good night and waited for her to leave. As soon as the door closed, he grabbed his laptop and accessed the detective's files. The photos of Sarah and Jason together, the detailed dating reports, everything was there. Thomas felt a surge of anger, but took a deep breath. Revenge was close, and he couldn't let himself get carried away by emotion. The next morning, while they were having breakfast, Sarah casually mentioned that Jason was hosting a party at his apartment and that it would be a good idea for them to go together. Thomas agreed, hiding his true plan. He knew that this party would be the perfect opportunity for the final confrontation. On the day of the party, Thomas prepared meticulously. He dressed carefully, choosing a suit that exuded confidence and power. Sarah was beaming, as if nothing was wrong, and this only fueled Thomas's determination. When they arrived at Jason's apartment, they were greeted with smiles and hugs. Loud music and laughter echoed throughout the space, creating an atmosphere of false joy. Thomas mingled with the guests, chatting and smiling, but his eyes were always on Sarah and Jason. He watched the furtive glances, the discreet touches, and each moment fueled his anger. When the party was in full swing, he knew it was time to act. He approached Sarah and Jason, interrupting a conversation they seemed to be having in secret. "Sarah, Jason, can we talk for a moment?" he asked, his voice calm and controlled. The two exchanged nervous glances, but agreed, following Thomas to a quieter corner of the room. Thomas stared at them, his expression unwavering. "I know what you're doing," he said, his words cutting like ice. "I know about the cheating, I know about the divorce plan, I know everything." Sarah went pale, and Jason tried to intervene, but Thomas raised his hand, silencing him. "You think you can fool me and get away with it? You underestimated the wrong person." His voice was low, but carried with unquestionable authority. Jason, trying to maintain his composure, responded, "Thomas, you're exaggerating. It's not at all what you think." Thomas let out a cold laugh. "Oh no. And those photos?" He pulled an envelope from his pocket and threw the photos on the table next to him. The images of Sarah and Jason together, laughing, kissing, were scattered like pieces of a devastating puzzle. Sarah tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Thomas turned to her, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "I loved you, Sarah. I trusted you. And you planned all of this behind my back." He took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that threatened to boil over. "But now, the game is over. And you will pay for every lie." He walked away, leaving Sarah and Jason frozen. As he left the party, he felt a strange sense of relief. The first move had been made, and now it was only a matter of time before his entire revenge plan unfolded. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was prepared to face any challenge. Thomas returned to his apartment, feeling the weight of the night bearing down on him. He knew that this was just the first stage of his revenge. The next steps would require even more precision and control, but he was determined. Sarah and Jason had underestimated their power of reaction, and that would be their biggest flaw. He sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the city that never slept. Chicago seemed calm, oblivious to the personal dramas unfolding in its tall buildings and busy streets. Thomas took a sip of his whiskey, letting the warmth of the drink calm his nerves. He knew that, to win, he would need to be cold, calculating and ruthless. Thomas's journey of revenge was just beginning, and he was ready for anything. Sarah's betrayal had awakened something within him, a determination he never knew he possessed. And as the city continued its relentless pace, Thomas traced each step with precision, knowing that the end of this story would be written by him, and him alone. That night, he slept with a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but Thomas was prepared to face it. He wouldn't allow Sarah and Jason to get away with it. His revenge would be slow, meticulous, and devastating, and when it finally came to an end, everyone would know that Thomas was not someone to be underestimated. The confrontation at Jason's party was just the beginning. Thomas spent the next few days crafting his plan, moving each piece with precision. He knew that perfect revenge required patience and impeccable execution. The pain of Sarah's betrayal fueled his determination. He immersed himself in work, maintaining the appearance of normality, but every spare moment was devoted to preparing his next move. The first part of the plan involved destabilizing Sarah emotionally. He started leaving little hints, subtle but enough to make her nervous. A cryptic message on the bathroom mirror, a note left in his bag, little reminders that he was aware of everything. Sarah began to show signs of nervousness, but Thomas remained calm, waiting for the right moment to act. At work, Thomas became close to Lisa, Sarah's chef friend. He knew that Lisa was a person of integrity and that if she found out about the betrayal, she would not hesitate to support Thomas. At a casual lunch, Thomas shared his suspicions, showing some of the photos and messages he had found. Lisa was shocked and promised to help him gather more information. With Lisa on his side, Thomas felt he had a valuable ally. Sarah, in turn, began to feel the pressure. The anonymous messages, the little insinuations, everything was starting to affect her. She tried to maintain the facade of a devoted wife, but Thomas could see the tension in her eyes. He continued to play his role, waiting for the right moment for the final revelation. The opportunity came at a dinner that Sarah had organized. She invited her closest friends, including Jason, Mark, Lisa and other co-workers. Thomas knew this would be the perfect night to reveal everything. He prepared everything carefully, ensuring every detail was in place. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily, laughter and stories being shared. Thomas waited until everyone was comfortable before making his move. He stood up, asking for everyone's attention, and began to speak. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said, his voice calm and collected. "Sarah and I have been through some difficult times recently, and I feel like it's time to share some truths." Sarah tensed, her eyes fixating on Thomas. He continued, taking an envelope out of his pocket. "I found some things that changed the way I view our relationship," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "And I think it's time for everyone to know the truth." He opened the envelope and began handing out the photos and messages. Silence fell over the room as the guests absorbed the shock of the images. Jason tried to get up, but Thomas stopped him with a look. "Sarah, you faked this betrayal to get out of our marriage," Thomas said, his voice thick with coldness. "You planned all of this, thinking you could trick me and get away with it. But you underestimated who I am." Sarah's eyes were full of tears, but Thomas showed no compassion. He turned to his friends. "You were all deceived, just like me," he continued. "But now, the truth is out. Sarah planned all of this, with Jason's support. And I'm not going to let this go unnoticed." Lisa, shocked by the revelation, stood up and hugged Thomas. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," she said, with tears in her eyes. "We did not know." Thomas was grateful for the support, but remained focused. "That's just the first part," he said, looking at Sarah. "You're not going to get out of this that easily. I'm prepared to fight for what's mine, and you will pay for every lie." Sarah tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Thomas turned and left the room, leaving a devastating silence. He knew that this was just the first phase of his revenge, and that there was still much to be done. But at that moment, he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. The truth was out, and now he could focus on the next steps. Thomas spent the next few days consolidating his position. He knew the revelation at dinner was just the beginning. Sarah was visibly shaken, but had not yet shown her true reaction. He needed to be prepared for anything. The next step involved work. Sarah had built a successful career as a journalist, and Thomas knew that exposing her publicly would be a devastating blow. He gathered all the evidence he had and, with Lisa's help, contacted an influential editor at the magazine where Sarah worked. The editor, shocked by the revelations, agreed to publish a detailed story about Sarah's betrayal and plans. The day the article was published, Thomas saw Sarah break down. She was inundated with messages and calls, and her boss called her in for an emergency meeting. Thomas, knowing she was in for a storm at work, decided to take the next step. He scheduled a meeting with his lawyer to review the terms of the divorce. He knew Sarah would try to fight for a good portion of the assets, but he was prepared. With the help of his lawyer, Thomas had protected his assets, ensuring Sarah walked away with as little as possible. He didn't just want emotional revenge, I wanted to ensure that she felt the consequences of her actions in every aspect of her life. While Sarah struggled to maintain her career and face her impending divorce, Thomas focused on rebuilding himself. He dedicated more time to work, immersing himself in projects that kept him busy and away from dark thoughts. His friends, now aware of the betrayal, offered unconditional support, helping him get through the most difficult times. Jason, in turn, tried to remove himself from the situation, but Thomas didn't allow him to escape so easily. He knew that Jason was as much to blame as Sarah, and decided to confront him. In a chance meeting at a cafe, Thomas approached Jason and sat at his table. "We need to talk," Thomas said, his voice firm. Jason tried to look away, but Thomas didn't give him the chance. "Do you think you can just run away after everything you've done?" Jason, nervous, tried to justify his actions, but Thomas didn't want to hear excuses. "You destroyed my trust, betrayed my friendship," he said, the anger in his voice evident. "And now, you will pay for this." Thomas knew the best way to reach Jason would be through his professional reputation. He collected information about Jason's shady dealings and prepared a detailed dossier. With the help of an influential friend in advertising, he ensured that the information reached the right people. Soon, Jason began to face difficulties at work, losing important clients and being the target of internal investigations. As Sarah and Jason struggled to deal with the consequences of their actions, Thomas felt his revenge coming full circle. Not only did he expose the betrayal, but he also made sure they both felt the impact on their personal and professional lives. Thomas began to find his feet, finding a new perspective on life. He realized that although revenge brought a sense of justice, he also needed to move on. He began to get involved in activities he had previously neglected, such as cooking classes and running groups. He met new people and started to build a new network of friends. At one of these meetings, he met Julia, a talented and witty photographer who brought new light to his life. Julia, with her artistic vision and vibrant personality, helped Thomas rediscover the joy in little things. They started going out together, and little by little, a new love story began to form. Sarah, seeing Thomas's happiness, tried to get closer, apologizing and trying to justify her actions. But Thomas, now stronger and more aware of his worth, refused to back down. He knew he deserved more than a life of lies and betrayal. The climax of Thomas's revenge was an event he organized to launch a new architectural project. All of his friends and colleagues were present, including Sarah and Jason, who were now mere spectators of his ascension. Thomas took the stage, thanked everyone for their support and announced the beginning of a new phase in his life. He looked at Sarah and Jason, and for the first time, he felt at peace. Thomas had turned the pain of betrayal into a strength that propelled him to new heights. He knew that revenge had done its job, and now it was time to move on, leaving the past behind. The city of Chicago, with its bright lights and ceaseless rhythm, witnessed the journey of a man who refused to be defined by betrayal and instead chose to write his own ending. With his head high and his heart light, Thomas was ready for whatever came next. Revenge had been sweet, but the freedom and happiness he had found were even more precious. And so, he took the first step towards a bright future, leaving behind the shadows of the past. Thomas knew that even after the initial impact of the revelation, there was more to be done to ensure Sarah and Jason felt the full weight of their actions. The meeting in Sarah's office, Jason's professional decline, these were all necessary steps, but he wanted to go further. Revenge, for him, was more than just retribution, it was a lesson he wanted them both to never forget. After the launch event for his new architectural project, Thomas felt a sense of accomplishment. However, he couldn't ignore the uneasiness that still lingered in his heart. He needed to see real change, especially in Sarah, who had manipulated the situation from the beginning. Thomas began observing Sarah from a distance, noticing how she was trying to rebuild her life. He noted that she was seeing a therapist, probably trying to understand and justify her own actions. There was a paradox in her behavior. On the one hand, she seemed genuinely remorseful, on the other, there was still a hint of manipulation in his attitude. One day, Thomas received an unexpected call from Sarah. She asked to meet him in a discreet cafe, away from familiar eyes. Thomas hesitated, but decided to accept. He knew this meeting could provide final clarity on everything that had happened. At the cafe, Sarah was visibly nervous. His eyes, which had once sparkled with confidence, were now dark and regretful. Thomas sat across from her, waiting for her to start the conversation. "Thomas, I know I have no right to ask for anything," Sarah began, her voice shaking. "But I needed to talk to you. I needed to explain, try to make you understand what happened." Thomas kept his expression neutral, allowing her to continue. "I know what I did was unforgivable," she said, holding back tears. "Faking the betrayal, planning everything. I was desperate. I felt like our marriage had become a prison. And Jason, he was a terrible mistake. I know that now." Thomas took a deep breath, absorbing her words. "Sarah, you didn't just betray my trust, you tried to destroy my life. And why? Because you were bored? Desperate? There are many ways to deal with marriage problems, but your choice was the most selfish one possible." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Thomas. And I'm paying the price. I lost my job, my reputation. I lost you. And that hurts more than anything." Thomas watched her for a moment, considering his next words. "Sarah, life is about choices. You chose the path that was easiest for you, without caring about the consequences for others. I can't forgive what you did, but I can put it behind you." Sarah sobbed, trying to compose herself. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Thomas. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. I'm in therapy, trying to understand my actions and become a better person." Thomas stood up, feeling that the conversation had come to an end. "I hope you can, Sarah. For your own good." As he left the cafe, Thomas felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Sarah seemed genuine in her regret, but he knew he couldn't take it back. His life was heading in a new direction, and he needed to focus on that. Upon returning home, Thomas found a message from Julia, inviting him for a walk in the park. He smiled, feeling a lightness in his heart. Julia was a constant, positive presence in his life, and he was beginning to see a future with her. They met in the park, walking hand in hand and enjoying the simplicity of the moment. Julia, with her attentive gaze and warm smile, made Thomas feel valued and loved. They talked about everything and nothing, and Thomas realized that he was really happy. As the sun set, he looked at Julia and realized that despite all the pain and betrayal, he had found something precious, a new chance to love and be loved. Revenge had done its job, but now it was time to move on, to build a future based on trust and genuine love. Thomas knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but he was ready to face them. With Julia by his side and a new perspective on life, he was ready to leave the past behind and embrace the possibilities of the future. The journey of revenge had come to an end, and a new journey of hope and love was just beginning. Thomas felt he had finally achieved inner peace. With Julia by his side, he could see a bright future. However, life had a peculiar way of throwing unexpected challenges. He was about to discover that the consequences of his actions were not yet over. Sarah, after the conversation at the cafe, seemed to have withdrawn from her life. Thomas believed she was focused on her therapy and rebuilding her life, away from him. However, one cold autumn morning, he received a desperate call from Lisa. Sarah had disappeared. Thomas felt a chill. Even though he no longer loved Sarah, he still cared about her. He and Lisa met to discuss what could have happened. Lisa revealed that, after losing her job and reputation, Sarah had become involved with dangerous people, desperately trying to regain control of her life. Thomas knew he needed to do something. With Lisa's help, Thomas began searching for clues. They discovered that Sarah was involved in an illegal information trafficking scheme, something she had started in order to make a quick buck. Things had gotten out of control, and now she was missing, possibly in great danger. Thomas and Lisa decided to seek help. They contacted authorities and provided all the information they had. As police investigated, Thomas felt a huge weight in his heart. He wanted Sarah to pay for her actions, but he never wanted her to fall down such a dark path. Meanwhile, Jason was also dealing with the consequences of his actions. The exposure of his illicit activities had destroyed his career. With no clients and internal investigations underway, he was fired and faced a series of lawsuits. Jason, helpless and in despair, turned to alcohol and drugs, trying to escape the reality of his ruined life. One night, Jason, drunk and desperate, decided to look for Thomas. He showed up at Thomas's apartment, furious and out of control. Julia, scared, tried to calm the situation, but Jason was beyond reason. He blamed Thomas for his downfall, conveniently forgetting his own actions. Thomas, remaining calm, tried to talk to Jason. "You did this to yourself, Jason. Your choices brought you here." But Jason didn't want to hear it. He attacked Thomas, and the two got into a physical fight. Julia called the police, who arrived in time to prevent the situation from getting worse. Jason was arrested, and Thomas realized how deeply revenge had poisoned their lives. He felt a mixture of sadness and relief when he saw Jason taken away. Jason and Sarah's actions had led everyone down a path of destruction, and now it was time to close that chapter once and for all. A few weeks later, the police found Sarah. She was in a critical condition, having been beaten by those she had been involved with. Thomas visited the hospital, feeling a wave of sadness at seeing Sarah in that condition. She had been his wife, someone he had loved deeply, and seeing her like this was devastating. Sarah, conscious, looked at Thomas with eyes full of regret. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I messed up." Thomas held her hand, feeling a mixture of compassion and sadness. "I hope you find peace, Sarah. And I hope one day you can forgive yourself." Sarah survived, but her road to recovery would be long and painful. Thomas knew she needed to face the consequences of her actions, but he also wished she could find redemption and inner peace. While all this was going on, Thomas and Julia continued to build their life together. The experience had made them stronger, and they were determined to move forward. Thomas learned that revenge, although satisfying in the moment, could not be the basis of his happiness. He needed to leave the past behind and focus on the future. Thomas and Julia decided to move to a new city, away from Chicago, to start over. They chose Boston, a city with its own history and charm. There, Thomas opened his own architecture firm, and Julia found new opportunities for her photography career. Life in Boston brought a new perspective. Thomas found joy in projects that benefited the community, and Julia documented her adventures through her artistic lens. They formed new friendships and created a home filled with love and laughter. Thomas never forgot what happened, but he refused to let it define his life. He and Julia had built a life based on trust and love, something he had learned to value more than anything. And so, as the sun set over the Boston skyline, Thomas finally found peace. He had turned pain into strength, betrayal into a lesson, and revenge into a resolution. His journey had been difficult, but in the end, he emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for a bright future with Julia.